Welcome back. This morning, we are taking a look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and we're doing it through a brand new Canadian course.
You'll often hear people saying things like, I don't see color. I treat everyone the same. I want you to consider this. You do see color.
That is Camille Dundas, the creator of an online micro-credential course, the first of its kind at Dalhousie University. It gives people the language to shut down hurtful conversations in the workplace and the knowledge to ignite meaningful change. Camille Dundas is joining us this morning with more. Camille, good morning to you. You know, such an exciting conversation to have because, you know, we have been having conversations over the past few years now about what needs to change. And for so many people, how to change it is the difficulty. So talk to us a little bit more about this course, who it's for, and how it works.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Well, the course uses a really unique approach of micro-learning to tackle difficult topics surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I created it in response to the most common question I get, which is, how do I respond when someone at work says, insert offensive comment here, right? The rules are a little different in the workplace. So even if you know what someone has said is inappropriate, calling that out can really bring unwanted repercussions for you sometimes. So the course is for all levels of employees in the workplace who want to focus on making their communication more inclusive. And I really encourage workplace teams to take the course together. It's micro-learning. That means all the videos in the course are between 5 to 10 minutes. So at your weekly team meeting, for example, take the first 15 minutes and talk about your emotional reactions to watching the videos and unpack everyone's feelings around how the concepts play out on your team. And your team can get registered on the Dalhousie website in just a few clicks.
Now, it's fantastic that it's so accessible to so many people now. I think that a lot of people have questions about how companies can do this in a real way without being performative. And that's been a very big criticism of many companies out there who have tried to do the inclusive, diverse approach to staffing, to whatever facet of their company. You intentionally put this together after a year of research. And in Canada, you know, some people will say, we're not racist. You made the intention of making this Canada-centric. What did you find?
Well, great question in terms of what I found in my research. First of all, the course covers a lot of different identity issues. We cover bias, gender identity, gender expression, neurodiversities, ageism, mental health, racism from both a Black and Indigenous perspective. And on those issues, I've really grounded the course in Canadian historical framework, because that's really important for me, because when we take that approach of, like, we're not racist here, we don't have any issues, it allows us to ignore the issues that we're facing. One of the most important myths I had to dispel was that when it comes to something like slavery, that we have some kind of moral high ground to stand on in Canada. For example, I remember Doug Ford saying that Canada doesn't have the same deep roots of racism that the United States does. But, Dougie, try to open a textbook, because that's not actually true at all.
Right.
And in my research, what I found was that Canada's roots of racism and slavery are in fact quite deep. And what surprises most people is in Canada, for example, holding enslaved people was a sign of their wealth. James McGill, who McGill University is named after, had 6 Black and Indigenous enslaved people as part of his property. 6 out of the 16 members of the first Parliament of the Upper Canada Legislative Assembly were slave owners. Businessmen, priests, nuns, all owned enslaved people during this time. So it was a common thing. It wasn't an exception, right? And we have this idea that Canadians were at the forefront of the abolition movement. That is part of our history, but again, not the full picture. By the early 1800s, Lower Canada, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, they actually had attempted to abolish slavery, but failed, meaning that every bill they introduced failed. So people did not want to vote for this to pass. At the same time, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia were actually introducing bills to further legalize enslavement. I had no idea that Black enslaved people in Canada actually began to obtain their freedom through the courts via technicalities. They would escape, and then their owners would have to appear before the courts and prove that they had the legal right to purchase that person, which at the time was apparently quite difficult to do. So slavery gradually started becoming economically unfeasible, and that's how it kind of came to an end.
Yeah, and Camille, thank you so much for sharing that history. So much more needs to be revisited and looked at and examined. One thing I did want to get to you before we run out of time is dealing with microaggressions at work. It's something that happens for some people on a daily basis, in a quite regular fashion. How to actually deal with that, how to cope if you're on the receiving end of that. What are your tips?
Yeah. So a couple different ways to cope with this. There's collective coping, which we call micro affirmations. That's people of color, for example, getting together and affirming each other, whether it's in an ERG or just either a non formal group that they get together with. You can also have resistance coping, which is confronting these microaggressions head on, or also self protective coping, which a lot of us engage with, which is just not engaging in these conversations whatsoever. But it's really important also to talk about how do we interrupt these microaggressions, these biases, these acts of exclusion when they do happen. And the course is full of tips on how to speak up in the workplace. For example, you can just say, what do you mean by that? Or you can be a little more direct and ask, well, why does that person's race or gender matter in this conversation? Did I miss something? Or if you're like me and you talk with your whole face, you can use a nonverbal look of disapproval, which works for me every time. So, but what also is really important that we can teach people to call things out all we want, but if employers don't support them when they do call things out, instead of making them the troublemaker or trying to kind of brush things under the rug, things will never change. We have to enact consequences for these behaviors, and employers have to support people when they do come forward.
No, great tips, and honestly, such a wonderful conversation to have with you. And I hope a lot of people take away some of the things that you've said and really ignite that change on their own. Thank you so much. Camille Dundas, racial equity educator, joining us on this.